Hello, Trinity Tigers. Welcome to the Learning Together live webinar series as part of Lifelong Learning Initiatives presented by Trinity University Office of Alumni Relations. I am Michelle Bartonico, class of 2008. I am the Assistant Vice President for Strategic Communications and Marketing at Trinity. The Alumni Office has invited me today to moderate this webinar, and it is my distinct pleasure to introduce today's webinar speaker, Dr. Erin Subner, Associate Professor of Human Communication. Erin is a West Coast native who came to Trinity after earning her PhD at Arizona State University's Hugh Downs School of Human Communication. Her research focuses on the role of computer-mediated communication, for example, social networking sites, online dating, and other communication technologies, in social and personal relationships. And before I start engaging Dr. Sumner in our webinar conversation addressing interpersonal communication in the age of social media, I would like you who are watching this webinar to know that you can submit questions as you listen using the Q&A tab, and Dr. Sumner will be happy to answer these throughout the conversation. So before we kind of dive into everything, can you give us a quick overview of all of your areas of study?
Yeah, so my research is really summed pretty well in the title of the webinar. I'm primarily trained in interpersonal communication, which is the study of all things, both social relationships and personal. Think of like close relationships. So friendship, family, romantic, all those sorts of things. We study the process of interpersonal communication. So how do we form relationships? How do we maintain them? How do we maintain positive impressions of ourselves? How do we break up with people? All those related things. Now, my own research as a CMC scholar also is basically how does technology funnel into this? How does it affect our relationships? How is relationship and relational communication playing out on technology?
Okay. So it seems every day you're kind of hearing about a new technology or a new platform or way of using a current platform. So how do you stay up to date with research? How do you immerse yourself in all that?
It's a challenge.
Yeah.
Pretty much everyone who studies what I study has had a study utterly ruined in the middle of it because the technology interface changed. Mm-hmm. So I was working on a liking study about the Facebook like button. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden we had reactions. And my study is like, oh, okay. So typically what we do is we actually try to ground it all in some sort of foundational interpersonal concept. Like I said, we're initiating relationships. Mm-hmm. We're maintaining relationships. Mm-hmm. There's negative communication, things like bullying. There's impression management I mentioned. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I think a lot of us try to do, and one of the things that we often hear and kind of correct a bit in everyday interaction, is sort of breaking apart this notion of new technology, mm-hmm. because most new technologies are only sequentially new. And all the debates that we have about new technology, we've had before. And this is something that a lot of times people forget. They get caught up in the hysteria of social media, as though there's like before social media and after social media. Before social media, the world was great and there was birds chiming, and after everything's gone horrible. Well, there's been a lot of moments like that. One of the great ones that I'd like to talk about, some of you may have read Plato's Phaedrus in undergraduate. In that, Socrates warns against written communication and reading. He says it's going to make people forgetful and they won't be able to engage properly. How can we understand the world without nonverbals, right? It was an oral society. Writing was foundationally just ground shifting in that regard. Again, amusingly, I hear that talked about all the time now. How could you engage on computer-mediated communication? You lose nonverbals. Mm-hmm. So you do it with writing too, right? Mm-hmm. Same thing with telephone. It's going to cause brain damage. What am I going to do? Just interrupt you and call? What if you're busy? It's rude. Mm-hmm. Then how do we even start this? What do? We pick up the phone. Hello? That didn't exist. We didn't say that before the phone, right? Mm-hmm. And again, we see these things playing out now. A lot of people like to talk about how young folks prefer text rather than call. Mm-hmm. Yes, because it's come back to being rude to call and interrupt somebody when you could text them instead. Mm-hmm. You don't know if they're busy. So we see, again, some of these debates are not that new, mm-hmm. which is not to say that social media doesn't have new elements. It certainly does. But it's important to keep it all in perspective. Mm-hmm. We've been here before as a society. This isn't our first rodeo with new technology. We've had these discussions.
Yeah. So how do you parse through the idea of building strong relationships, and what does it actually mean to have a relationship or a friendship online? If I've got 5,000 friends, what does that say about me, or what does that actually mean?
Yeah, I think of a couple things that people are sort of studying with this. One is you mentioned, like, if I have 5,000 friends, what does that say about me? One piece of that is, what does that say about you to me if I don't know you, right? Because that's one thing. We care about how others form impressions of us. I have seen some research suggesting that there's kind of a diminishing returns pattern with that, where, like, if you have 2 friends, I assume that you are weird in some way, because why can't you have more friends? If you start getting more and more friends, I start thinking you're popular and cool. But if you get too many, I think you're weird and desperate, because why do you have 10,000 friends? You can't possibly have that many friends, right? But again, that's on my side as viewing you. Now, from your side, I think it's very different, which is that if you have 10,000 friends or 5,000 friends, when you look at your friend list, do you know who those people are?
Yeah, pretty much.
Well, yeah, right? You look at it and you say, oh, that's my best friend from high school. That person. I don't know them well. I had them in class freshman year, I think. Maybe it was sophomore year. I don't know. But yeah, they're okay. You still know that, right? It's not like you lose sight of who your friends are and who your friends aren't. Social media is really great at facilitating those sort of superficial ties, which doesn't, saying they're superficial doesn't mean they're not important. There was a really great article in The Atlantic a while back that summarized a lot of actually communication research on the topic of, like, social media and friends. And again, it kind of ties into the idea that some of this isn't new. As we reach adulthood, it's really hard to keep up all of our relationships. We have limited time. In a way, time is our most valuable resource, right? I've got work, I've got a kid, I've got a husband. I mean, what do I do? Well, my friends come in last place, and they're the ones I cancel on. They're the ones I try to schedule a date with 3 weeks from now and then cancel at the last minute, right? Now, when we talk about friendship, you think of active friends as one word we use. Think of an active friend as those people, they're probably on your social media, they're probably on other channels, the people that if you needed help, they would be the ones you would call to actively provide you with social support. They would listen to you, they would help you move boxes, whatever you need. Those are our active friends. Again, most of us don't have too terribly many of those because we don't have time. Because if you're going to move boxes for me, guess what? Who are you going to call when you need a box moved?
Right.
So it's time consuming. Beyond that, we have a large network of weaker ties. And what we see on social media is we're actually calling these, again, mentioned in that Atlantic article, commemorative ties and dormant ties. Ties that were once maybe strong, once maybe weak, but they're sleeping on social media. So commemorative meaning, like, I knew that person in 6th grade. They're still important to me, but I don't expect them to help me move boxes. And if I'm upset, I'm not going to call them. But I do like seeing things that are happening in their lives. I like seeing that their daughter won an award at camp. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. That's happening. I'm happy for them. So social media is kind of, in a weird way, providing us a doorway into these people's lives. In some ways, that's odd, right? Because in the old days, they disappeared and they showed up at the 20-year reunion and you went, what's going on? Now people walk into the reunion and they say, what's going on? I already know. Yeah. I mean, and that's kind of creepy, right? What's going on? I haven't seen you in 20 years. Congratulations to your daughter who just, but we have this knowledge in ways that is, again, a little bit different, but not that different because these people were always in our lives.
Yeah. How does it change the protocol with, say you have a big announcement or you've won something or you want to share your personal thoughts, but they're also not so personal that you would only tell one person.
Yeah.
Is there a protocol there where you have to tell your brother or sister or your mom first, and then all of a sudden
sounds like you have a story
it.
here. I won't ask
No.
I think we all have a story where we've had big news, right? You want to announce a pregnancy, an engagement, a job change, whatever it is. We have had, again, this is something we've always worked around. We call it privacy management dynamics, but we've always had this sense of, like, disclosure is personal, and we disclose more personal things to our close friends and close networks. So we have the sense that we need to tell them first before we tell social media. And again, I can think of horror stories of my own where word got out about something and I'm like, no, don't tell anyone because my boss doesn't know that yet. Or, my friend doesn't know that yet. So I think that is a kind of it's not a new challenge, but it's playing out on a much bigger stage. Because before, if I told you a secret and I say, don't tell anyone, and you tell someone, you told one person.
Right.
If you post it on social media, you just told apparently 10,000 people, right? So I think, again, this is one of those, the problem isn't new, but the way it's playing out is a little uncomfortable for a lot of folks.
Yeah. So let me shift gears a little bit. So you'll often hear or read that people will say, are the kids okay? And can you help me define kids? What does that even mean? And are they okay?
Well, that's a loaded question. Are the kids okay? I almost keep that question of are the kids okay separate from Is it because of social media and technology? And I think those are really an important thing to keep in mind. One of the things I notice is that a lot of people like to use the term millennial as like some generic thing that they sling against anyone under the age of 20. Like, oh, those darn millennials. Millennials are the oldest millennials are approaching 40, right? They're middle-aged almost. And the youngest ones are about 25, 24. So millennials, I'm a millennial, you're a millennial. We grew up along with the rise of technology. So we grew up in the dot-com boom. We watched all this happen. Can you remember playing like a VHS tape? Me too, right? Yep. I remember dial-up. I remember getting our first computer that took up an entire room of our house, and it went, and the internet was basically a way to transfer documents. You couldn't do anything to it. Do you remember? I mean, like literally, it was just like, here's a page that took 10 minutes to load. So I hope it was the right page. That's very different than those who came after that, right? I mean, so we came of age with it. After that, we have actually Generation Z, the post-millennials. And I think that's who people are kind of talking about when they say, are the kids all right? Post-millennials grew up very different. And in ways, some of it's due to technology and some of it's outside of technology. There's a book called Networked that outlines a lot of interesting things that show that the changes we see predate social media. Again, a lot of people like to treat social media like it's some lightning rod magic moment before and after. Really, it occurred in a larger pattern. And some of them are really interesting, like easier communication and travel. I have not lived near my family since I was 18. I would not have done that if it meant getting in a wagon and going west, knowing that I would never see my mother's face again, right? Now, not only can I fly to her in a matter of hours, we can FaceTime all the time, right? So that's a change that partially is due to technology and partially is not due to like social media. Changes in families, we see more divorces, we see blended families, all these things. Changes in parenting. And a great example of that is that these post-millennials that we call Generation Z, they were raised by Generation X. So some of you know who that is. They're the latchkey kids. They were the first generation who were kind of growing up with two-parent working households, which means they had their key and they went home, right? Turns out they did not like that very much and they wanted closer relationships with their parents. What do we see now? We see kids who are crazy close with their parents in ways that's kind of unprecedented. We see this idea of like trophy kids. Your kids are your greatest accomplishment. Teachers often joke about getting like a parent come at us like, explain this grade. Whereas back in the day, you would ask your kid to explain that grade, right? So again, we're getting a sense of who this generation are. They don't remember life before 9/11. They don't remember life before a war on terror. They don't remember life before not just dial-up, but like fully mobile smartphone type social media world. So again, some of the things we see with them, social media is playing a role in. Some of it are probably other things. Now you mentioned anxiety and depression, and that's something that a lot of people are concerned with. I want to show you. So let's call this little thing here. I don't know, anxiety. Sorry, I have horrible handwriting, which is why I do not teach elementary school. If you think of this as like all the reasons why somebody might have anxiety, why might somebody be anxious?
Bad relationship.
Bad relationship, okay.
Lose their job.
They lost their job.
Poor self-image.
Poor self-image. You're tight on cash that month.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things going on that can make people anxious. What I tend to hear is people try to mention social media like this, as though if you understand people's social media use, that's why they're anxious, right? The reality is that most of the research, we are seeing some connections, right? There's study after study showing correlations between anxiety, depression, and social media use. But what does that look like? Those of you who know Venn diagrams, we'll call this social media. This itty bitty little sliver here is what we're seeing. Correlations, often to like 3-4% effect size. What does that mean? It means that social media use is related to maybe 3% of why people are anxious. Now, that's interesting. I have my eyes on that, right? Why are we seeing a 3% effect size? That it's consistent. So 1A is small. There's a lot of other things going on. So to get back to, are the kids all right? Well, maybe part of it is that they're using a lot of social media. Part of it is that they're told that they have to succeed in a world where there's no jobs for them. And by the way, they have $50,000 in student loan debt. So they're going to need a really good job. If they want to get a good job, they have to have straight A's so they can get into the best graduate school, right? I mean, these are what my students tell me. These are their concerns. When they come in, and they're upset that they got an A- or a B+. That they're not upset about their social media use. They're literally having a panic attack in my office because they think they're not going to be able to get the future that they want. And all that concern is weighing on them. Kids today are also really overscheduled, right? I don't know if you heard like it's like school, homework, soccer practice, band, all these things that will help them succeed in the future. By the way, they're also really safe in ways that are unprecedented. One of the things I often talk about is like people glamorize the good old days where kids went out and did stuff. So when you were smoking on the street corner at 15, that's what we want for our kids. I would get arrested if I let my toddler go out, like you honestly, you see parents who are charged with negligence for letting their 8-year-old walk down to the park in ways that they did. So, I mean, the world is different. And I think, again, part of it is social media, and we want to look at that, but we don't want to lose sight of the greater picture, because for me, there's, if we try to basically say causal, social media causes this, we can't really understand what's going on because we're kind of losing sight of what the bigger picture is, which is kind of the second piece. Just because it's correlated doesn't mean it's caused. So we never want to jump to that conclusion that it's causal. I just saw a study actually that found that they looked at social media use and depression with young, like, adolescents, and then they followed up years later. And they thought they would find that the more you use social media at the first time, the more depressed you would be later, right? Social media use causes depression. They actually found the opposite, but not unique, because it was different among men, girls and boys. But the idea that they actually found was that people who are more depressed were more likely to use more social media. So this is where, again, we have
it's more of a behavior beforehand than it is.
And maybe it's a little both, right? But it's too easy to just scapegoat social media for larger things. Again, what role is it playing? If it's feeding into the anxiety, we want to look at that. I'm concerned with every single % of that, but it's not easy. It's too simple to just say, this explains it. Get off social media and all your problems are solved.
Yeah. What about time? So, what is the difference between addiction, habit, hobby? People spend quite a bit of time, regardless of demographic, on social media. Yeah. And is that an addiction?
This is another one that you hear tossed around a lot. I'm so addicted to my phone, LOL, right? Or, my kids are addicted to their technology. In some ways, I would challenge that the adults are responsible if that's the case, right? Because our behavior pattern, serves as a model. My son has recently started walking up to me. He's 2.5, and he'll say, "No, mommy," and he'll literally shut my laptop. And that's like a slap in the face to me, because he's telling me, you're focusing on that, and I want you to focus on me. And that probably is a sign that I need to put it down, right? Beyond that, though, I think addiction, there's, it's a loaded word. I mean, addiction is misused. If you think of addiction, it comes with physiological withdrawal, things like that. If anything, I think technology is more of a behavioral compulsion. So that's like things like gambling. You're not truly addicted to it in the sense that you're not going to shake if you can't do it, but you don't like it and you will seek it. Technology is very alluring in that sense. It beeps, it buzzes. Have you ever heard of random reinforcement? This is like straight from psychology, actually. But we found that random reinforcement is really powerful in terms of if you give random rewards, not constant rewards, random rewards, people will keep coming back for more, right? And technology is kind of like that. I hear my phone buzz. I don't know who's on there. But like, picture it right now. Picture if your phone started buzzing. You're like, who is it? What do they want? Is it good? Is it bad? I don't know. And you have, and again, you get that kind of, you get that rush of dopamine that you get with other things. And that is one of those things that is a little bit new with technology, because in the old days, if my husband had a question for me, he didn't like pop up on the table and ask it right now, but he can do that through my phone, and I'm going to want to check it because I don't know who it is, right? And then I'm like, oh, it's just my husband asking a question, right? So to get back to the question of like, are we addicted? I would argue no, because addiction is kind of a loaded term, and that who gets to decide what counts as addiction? Dana Boyd argues that it's almost a way of pathologizing a behavior that adults don't like for kids to do. To give a good example of this, I think of, so I played softball in college. Was I addicted to it? What do you think?
Probably.
Is it fair to say that I was addicted to softball? That sounds weird, right?
Maybe that behavioral compulsion.
It's good for you,
right? It's good for you. It's good exercise.
Yeah.
It builds
teamwork,
team bonds,
all those things.
Yeah.
I skipped my senior prom because I had a softball game. I probably like neglected homework a few times in ways that hurt my grades. I definitely skipped a lot of things with my friends. So if you look at it's hurting my relationships. I can still barely move my shoulders sometimes because of it. So it hurt my body, right? All those characteristics are met, but it's weird to say I'm addicted to softball. Right. But if you plug in everything I just said with the word video game.
Or reading.
Reading is another great example. I don't know about you. I was a dork as a kid. I liked reading. And I would actually be reading by flashlight at 2 a.m. And my parents would have to come in and be like, you need to get some sleep. So I was reading to the neglect of my sleep. Was I addicted to reading? You probably wouldn't say so. You'd say, that's good. It'll serve her well in life. It probably has. But if I were playing video games, that's bad behavior now, right? Because, well, video games, actually, there's all sorts of research showing you strategy, all sorts of, you actually can gain things from video games. Again, I think the key here is that are some kids and adults using it to a problematic extent? Of course, right? I mean, yes, there are people who are playing video games to the point that they drop out of college. I've had them in my classes. That's not good. But for the most part, if you're just like, LOL, I'm addicted to technology, but you're a functioning adult with great relationships and all those things. And that's something that I often think of is people like to talk about like your online relationships and your offline relationships, as though your online is somehow separate from your offline. We live in an age where our relationships are multimodal. If you think of, actually, chances are you use technology the most with people you're closest with offline. If I were to map out all my technology use, it would correlate strongly with who I see the most offline. Because who do you need to coordinate with? I need to text the people that I want to meet up for lunch. And so we're seeing that actually the closer we are, the more likely we are to use a whole bunch of different channels, and the more likely we therefore are to want to use these channels to sustain our offline bond. And when you talk to students, that's what they tell you. They say, there's people I can keep up with online who I don't have access to otherwise, and that's great. These friends from home who I don't see. But I also can text my boyfriend and say, do you want to meet for lunch? Right?
Yeah. So you talk about online and offline friends. What about online and offline self? So who you are on social media, is that actually who you are? Is that just another facet of who you are? How do you, what is your reaction
just
to that?
like, to me, I can't say online and offline friends because they're all just my friends. And some I keep up with using social media, some I keep up with mainly in person. Same thing with ourself. When I think of like who I am, think of how I present myself separately and the same in different situations. I think, excuse me, a lot of people like to pretend that we're just this nice, cohesive, coherent thing. There's a metaphor of the self as a crystal, actually, like multifaceted, fragmented, kind of all over the place. So I'm showing a piece of myself now, but that's a different piece than I show in other situations. And one of them isn't real and the other isn't fake. If it were, we would get in trouble a lot in face-to-face situations too. Job interviews, right? You go on a job interview. Are you being fake? I hope not. If you are, you're lying. You're going to get in trouble. But maybe you're just like playing yourself up. I don't know. I don't usually dress like this on a random Wednesday during summer break. But here I am. Am I lying to you? Am I falsely displaying myself? No, I just dress nice for this occasion. I don't know. Same thing online. I think what we see is that people are aware of different pieces of themselves. One way that people have described it is real self or actual self, ideal self, and ought self. Think of that as who I see myself as right now, who I see my ideal self as, like this is kind of me. I think I could be that way. Maybe someday I will be that way. And then ought self is basically who I think you want me to be to have a good view of me.
Got it.
I'm going to keep all those things in mind all the time, right? In different situations. Online, we tend to see people sort of focus in a little bit more strategically on that ideal self and ought self. This is what people want me to be, so this is what I'm going to display. Interestingly, most people don't make things up entirely. We see this in online dating. People are worried about like catfishing. Catfishing is pretty rare, actually. Why? Because most people go to online dating sites to meet somebody to date offline. Right. Again, it's a misnomer. Online dating, like, oh, why do people want to date online? They don't. They want to find somebody to date, and they're not finding anyone. And the internet is a way for them to find somebody that they can then date offline. Now, what's funny is once they meet offline, guess how they're going to interact? exchange numbers, start texting, start meeting up for coffee. So really, it was only online till they got there to that first date. Now, why I mentioned that first date is if I lie to you, like outright, utterly lie to you about who I am, what's going to happen on that first date?
Oh, I mean, it's a bait and switch.
Yeah, and it's not going to go well. So if my goal is to find somebody to date offline and I tell you that I'm, 6'5", and, if I just make up this whole picture of myself, if I give you fake photos that aren't even of me, if I tell you, that my job is different than what it is, you're going to not have trust in me once we meet up. So most people tend to be themselves within the reign of I might shave 10 pounds off, but I'm not going to shave 100 pounds off, right? That's noticeable. So we strategically self-present much in the same way we would at a job interview. I want to get your attention, but I want this to work long term. And that's what we do on social media too. A lot of people are concerned with social media. We mentioned depression earlier. So one of the biggest predictors of whether or not social media use will be related to depression is whether or not people use it in ways that leads them to engage in what we call social comparison.
Okay.
So one of the worries with social media is that you're essentially getting other people's highlights reel. I like to relate it to the old idea of sending Christmas cards, right? Where you're like, here's what my family was up to this year. What do you include?
Oh, all the highlights.
All the highlights, all the great
trips,
things, right?
all the smiling faces. Yeah.
Smiling faces of your family at the beach, right? Now, again, is that fake? No, that happened. But you didn't see the scene beforehand where the kids were all throwing things at each other and everyone was screaming, and that's not what you put in your highlights reel. Excuse me, my voice is going out here. I think the danger is if I'm viewing social media, I need to keep that in mind, that I'm seeing your highlights reel, that your life is messy and complicated just like mine. And that, great that you went to Europe on vacation, but that doesn't mean your life is perfect. But if I look at those, and my tendency when I'm using social media is to look at these things and see my life isn't good because it's not as good as yours, because I know my own backstage mess. You have a backstage mess too. And I think that that's something that people need to keep in mind when they're using social media is we're all being ourselves, but our best selves.
Do you think certain people are prone to that type of social comparison?
I think the same people who are prone to it every day life are prone to it, right? There's always somebody who wants to keep up with the Joneses and who always thinks the grass is greener on the other side. And I think social media can be particularly dangerous for those folks, right? If you're prone to engage in that sort of comparison, social media might not be the best environment, right? There's probably ways to work on that. But if you're not prone to it, you might not realize that other people are.
So you mentioned a little earlier that your toddler is actually closing your laptop for you. So do you think that the pendulum is going to actually swing the other way, where they're actually noticing where time is being spent and maybe valuing time in a different way?
I think you could see it. It's one of those things, who knows what's going to happen with these younger kids. They're not even post-millennials. They're this whole new thing, right? You do see this kind of getting off Facebook is kind of a cool new thing to do. And I think that's an example of what you mentioned. I'm consciously choosing to avoid social media. And that's something you see with younger folks. I think that's an example of that. I think in terms of people are starting to develop awareness of some of the risks of all of this. And again, there are some, the one that made me that I think of as something that I personally am more concerned with social media use, which is really two things. One is basically the sense of being always accessible. And it's not just social media, it's mainly my phone. Think of what a smart device is, though. It is combining what used to be a bunch of different devices. There's a calculator, there's a phone, there's internet, so I can look up information, my friends can contact, all these different distinct channels are on one device. That's powerful, and it's seductive, and it calls you in a little bit. Again, we have the power to not let it. But I think the fear that comes with that, Sherry Turkle has a book all about this called Alone Together, the sense that we might be together in a room, but we're all entranced in our own personal devices. And I think that we get bored and we're like, what's going on here? But once we look, we're in there, right? Again, notifications, who wants to talk to me? Ooh, somebody liked my photo. So I think that's a boundary that always exists. It's always existed, but it's certainly more so. And that's, again, mentioned my son closing my computer. I wanted to be present. And again, I think that's up to us. So I have some rules that I've actually set. My students will tell you I'm pretty strict about them. I won't check email after 6 p.m. because I'm with my family. If you send me an email at 7 p.m., I will get back to you the next morning and can wait, right? I don't bring my work with me on vacation. I'm about to go on vacation. And I told my people I was working with, you're not going to hear from me because I want to be present in that moment with my family, right? And part of the reason why is that I think anyone who is working probably feels the stress, and I think even kids feel the stress of being always on and being always accessible. It's very, very stressful, and it's leading to a lot of burnout. People are burnt out in their jobs. They've always been burnt out in their jobs, but it's really hard to say where's home and where's work. I don't know about you, but when I come home, I bring my work laptop with me, which means that I'm still tied to work. And it's really hard to turn it off because I feel like I want to succeed in my job, and it requires me. Again, the technology isn't the root cause here, but it is the vessel that's keeping me tied in to work at all times versus like going to the office 9 to 5, checking in out every day. In which case, the weekend was the weekend. You didn't work, right? A lot of us now are like, what's the weekend? That's the day where I kind of work from home, but I don't have to go to my office. And again, that feeling of stress and burnout of like somebody can always get a hold of me. And it's not just work, it's our friends too. What if somebody needs me? What if my friend has a question? We have this sense that like if I wait too long, like some giant crisis will emerge. It's probably not a crisis. It probably could have waited till the next day. I also have, like I mentioned, I have rules for myself. I turn my phone on to nighttime mode. What that means is that if you're not one of my favorites, which is like limited to like a couple of people, my phone will not ring until morning. Why? Because unless you're one of those handful of people, you have no business calling me in the middle of the night. In which case, if you did, I'll get to you in the morning, right? And so that's a boundary that I set for myself, along with turning off my computer at like 6 p.m. That also helps me fall asleep at night. We know that computers are stimulating. So people who have a hard time sleeping, close it, turn off that light, right? Turn off the new source of stimulation.
So is it fair for people to say, you know what, I quit. I'm done with social media and it's going to fix all my problems?
I don't think it'll fix all your problems, but if it's causing you stress, right? Just like anything, if there's something that is causing me problems, why would I continue to do it? One would be that you could, if you like the benefits of it, you could again find ways to get around the problematic use. So if you feel like social media is bringing you in too much, maybe you stop using it so much. Maybe you don't keep it open as a tab on your computer 24/7. Maybe you turn off the notifications like I did. I no longer get notifications. I want to come to the information. I don't want it summoning me out of whatever I was doing. So for me, that helped. Like I can go on social media and look at it however long I want and turn it off and walk away. And, okay. That was my Facebook fix for the day.
Is it okay? Is it considered sort of socially okay to disconnect from social media?
Probably depends on what your goals are and who your network are, right? Some people are like, you know what? I don't need those commemorative friends anyway. Like I don't need to keep up with them. So if you don't, then you don't, right? Definitely there is a social cost. You're shutting off networking opportunities, right? But if those networking opportunities aren't worth the risks of what it, if it's making you feel that way, then certainly that's probably not worthwhile. Some people mention that social media is essentially triggering all these bad thoughts as they go through. So let's say you have certain political beliefs and you know, it's easy enough to get through the day if you can avoid that, but then you go on social media and you see your friends and your grandparents, whoever, who are saying things that you disagree with. And you're like,
and normally it's just Thanksgiving, so
you can't hold out to Thanksgiving to get into it with your dear grandfather about his political beliefs, right? But honestly, that is concerning, right? Because I used to be able to ignore it. Now I can't ignore it because you're right there. Again, there are ways to get around that, and some people are dealing with it. Others are just like this. I need to take a break, or maybe just stop using it, right?
Yeah.
If there's a tool that doesn't work for you, don't use it. And I think that's important in general. I don't use Snapchat. My students laugh at me, but I'm like, I don't know anyone who uses Snapchat because I'm old, right? I don't know. I don't have, like, I would go on to Snapchat and like have a 80-day snap streak with myself. So I don't know anyone on Snapchat.
Right. And so that benefit isn't there for
There's
you.
no benefit of being on Snapchat to me. I mean, honestly, there's just no benefit to me, but there's benefits to other people, right? So selecting the channels that are beneficial for you is part of that. And again, if there's one that's not beneficial for you, you don't need to necessarily use it. But again, that's just channels in general, right? If TV isn't beneficial for you, you don't use it, right? So.
So I want to take a minute because we actually have a few questions that are coming in, and I know you wanted to spend some time with those. So we have some questions that you guys have written in through the Q&A. If you've got more, please go ahead and write some of those. We also have the chat area as well, so we'll go ahead and try to answer as many of those as possible.
Let's see here. It's an easy question. Yes, this is being recorded, and it'll be online later and accessible for you. Oh, that was answered by yourself. See some of these questions here. So one question that came up, I kind of answered a little bit earlier about, basically this question asks, as an educator, how can we help students recognize that their online social media persona isn't real because they choose only the positive aspects of their lives to post? This leads to depression. One thing I would say, again, here is that it doesn't lead to depression necessarily. And at most we see correlational stuff going on here, very little causal. I would say, their social media persona is real. And to some extent, people don't like being told that it's not real. A great example of this is Facebook. You have to be kind of real because what would happen if you weren't real on Facebook?
Well, first you'd be a bot and Facebook would probably shut you down.
That's true, yeah. But beyond that, if I go on to Facebook and start displaying pieces of totally fake information, my friends are gonna be like, wait, what is wrong with you? Because on Facebook is what Bree McEwen, a colleague of mine who studies this, so she refers to it as a fixed network. It's not that different than face-to-face. What happens on Facebook rarely stays on Facebook because you're interacting within your actual real network, right? And people forget that. They're like, oh, online isn't real. Talk to anyone who's had problems because of something that happened on Facebook. It's quite real. It's your real network interacting with your actual name right there. It all plays in. Now, I think the question that I kind of addressed earlier was that you are putting your best foot forward. And I think that just kind of noting that and helping them see that the same thing is true for the other people too, right? If you're putting your best foot forward, guess what they're putting? Their best foot forward. I think simply noting that is a lot for kids to understand in terms of those feelings of inadequacy. And I think that is a real threat, right? You're looking at like all these great things and you're like, oh my gosh, I haven't done any of those. They're posting all these updates. But telling them, they're showing off, just like you're showing off, right? Some people have been arguing that we should be a little bit more open on social media in terms of we've kind of developed a set of rules where we don't share the negative. It's supposed to be a positive place. I know some folks who are like real life, or there's like a whole thing about like real life mom moments. I don't know if you've seen it, but like people show those worst things. And I view them and I laugh hysterically because I'm like, oh my gosh, that's true. But seeing that kind of, again, demystifies that situation. Does that say that everyone should start airing out all their negative things on Facebook? No, of course not. But I think developing an awareness that that's the case is important. Just like people know that a job interview is people putting their best foot forward, right?
Yeah. So I want to take like a kind of a hard pivot real quick, unless you see another question that you wanted to address right now. But I wanted to actually kind of tackle this aspect of bullying on social media. It harkens back a little bit to Are the Kids Okay, right? And you definitely hear about them being unable to turn off social pressures or anxiety of physical popularity at a school. And how does that affect them? How does that translate through both technology and maybe social media as well?
So, cyberbullying is one of those things that is, again, not new. The cyber part is new. Bullying isn't new. Some researchers have kind of talked about the difference between like everyday teenage drama, which is like, you made me mad and I'm going to call you a name and you're going to call me a name and then we're going to get over it and be fine, right? And cyberbullying, which is truly targeted bullying. It has to be persistent, targeted, things like that. Bullying like that has always existed. I think where things become a little bit more troubling in terms of the cyber context is, one, you don't get to turn it off.
Right.
You don't get to walk away from it because you go home and you've been bullied off of social media, which is where your friends are. So now you're isolated, right? Again, where's the safe space? Your house isn't a safe space because you can access social media there, right? Or a lot of it happens via text messaging too. So I think that's something that is, again, concerning, and people are looking into that. I think the other thing that's kind of troubling with cyberbullying is that some of the patterns we see of cyberbullying end up with people pointing fingers at each other. Because if you think of bullying as in like schoolyard bullying, it's very clear who the bully is, right? And what we see with cyberbullying is that a lot of people are like, I didn't do anything. I just shared it. I didn't type up that horrible story. All I did was hit retweet, or all I did was hit type LOL, right? Well, you contributed, because each time that thing is shared, each time somebody engages with it, that feels like a whole nother hit against me, because I read the thing you posted about me and then I see that 57 people liked, oh my God, now 58, now people are retweeting it. Each one of those is a new act of bullying. But then after the fact, you're like, what I didn't do that. Which is something, again, we're trying to help kids see that like bystanders are part of the problem and those who engage in the spreading are part of the problem. And that's, a hard lesson to learn, especially when you're young and learning how to use these tools.
Yeah. And I mean, what responsibility do you think we bear in general with kind of beating the drum about things like that and making sure that it doesn't end up being pervasive in the society?
I think one of the biggest problems that actually at the root of technology is that there's a phrase that I hate, digital natives. I hate the term digital natives because it is at the root of so many of the things that go wrong, which is that we assume that the kids these days know about tech. Like they learn it via osmosis. They somehow, you know what, I have a tech problem, ask your grandson. Well, the problem here is that gives them all the power. We're the adults. We should be showing them and telling them. So we're essentially absolving ourselves of needing to teach our kids things because we don't want to learn the tech. And they know the tech. So we're going to give them the power and then we're going to let them lead the way. And I think this is one of those examples where it's up to the adults to not just look into this, but be setting the tone and not just be like, I can't understand kids in tech. We need to. Again, it's hard because there's always all these new tech tools, but I think part of that is also avoiding the fear factor of big tech is causing all these things. And it's playing a role in it, but we need to look at it, dissect it, and take responsibility for that. You can't just say, oh, I wasn't born with technology. Well, then what are we going to do here? Because the kids are teaching themselves, right? And that's not a good situation for anyone. By the way, most kids don't understand technology that well. They're not that, they're more digitally literate than any other generation before, but that doesn't mean that they know how to use technology in the right ways. They might not know how to make a YouTube video. Are they really literate users of the technologies that they use? Usually they're not. And they tell you that, like, oh, I don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
Right. So they need the adults to teach it. Actually, I would love to see a tech literacy class in schools where they talk about these things, right? Because it's something that affects everyday life.
Well, one thing that you talked about in the very beginning was that our oral communication moving to written would actually help, make us forget. It would, alleviate social cues and things like that. So really a lot of this is, a level of EQ and maybe quality of our communication that we're expecting younger people to have just because.
Yeah. You've learned. So I study in ways that I can't even begin to get into here, how every channel is different from every other channel. Text messaging, it's asynchronous. That means there's a time lag. It's also lean because you don't see the nonverbals. Again, that's an advantage sometimes. It's a disadvantage sometimes. If I want to, get deep emotional support from somebody, that leanness is not going to be so great, right? I can't get a hug via text message. But if I'm trying to brush off somebody who I don't want to answer, it's awesome. If I'm in class and I need to text message somebody to see if they want to meet up for lunch, I can't talk. So that leanness is really good. It also kind of says no pressure, right? When you get like text or email, you know that you don't have to respond like right away. Versus when somebody calls you, you're like, oh wow, I have to do this right now. So all these things. And I could keep going and going and going on that, but kids don't know that magically via osmosis by having grown up with social media, and they need to learn it, and adults do too, right? Yeah. And some of those discussions need to be occurring.
Got a few more questions here.
How do you feel about students being on their smartphones during in-person class sessions?
I actually do not ban technology from my classroom. I know some people do, and some of it is based on some research showing that technology in the classroom is actually less efficient than writing. So, again, it's a complicated situation. For me, if students benefit from having the technology there, I let them use it. I also have an outright discussion about it. So one of the ways that technology is, let me backtrack. People had the same discussion about the newspaper. They just bring their newspapers open in class and they're so distracted. Again, it's not new. But what is new is that if I have my laptop open and I'm not focusing on class, guess who else is seeing me shop for shoes?
Right.
everyone behind me. And this is really interesting. The other thing that tends to happen is that you open the computer and you're like, okay, I'm going to bring up my article that I'm going to read. Again, notifications. So I'm trying to read, but bing, bing, bing. So people are, and then you get sucked in. So I try to have discussions with my students about this is your education, not mine. And if you want to use technology in ways that are going to be disruptive, don't come to class. If you want to use technology in ways that are going to aid in your knowledge and aid in your situation and having your article, looking up information, have at it. But again, avoid those disruptions. We know that students who are multitasking are not going to learn well no matter what it is they're multitasking on. But the main thing I tell them is that you will not use technology in my classroom in a way that hurts your students around you. And if you do, I will ask you to leave. And I honestly, I don't usually have to have it go further than that because most of them get it because they've been in that situation of like, what are they watching, right? And it's hard.
Let's look at some of the other questions. Do I think people will be more comfortable with technology along with these changes, or will we always be inclined to distrust novel tech? I think there's always going to be a bit of a distrust, honestly. I think what's a little bit different with new technology is that it's happening so fast. I can decide quickly or fast. It's happening at a rate of innovation that is unprecedented, right? If you think about like major tech changes like writing, printing press, phone, telegraph, all those things, they were really spread out. People had a while to adjust. And right now, not only are the changes in the tools happening really fast, the interfaces of those, like think of every time Facebook changes their interface. Right? And that is disruptive. And usually people are like, this is horrible, I'm going to stop using it. And then they're like, oh, it's okay. Actually, I like this better. That happened when I got my newest iPhone and they changed the whole operating system and it really made me mad. And then I was like, oh, I like this. Like, honestly, it took me about a week. So I think, the more we realize that this is part of a larger conversation, the better. But again, this doesn't mean we absolve ourselves that like new tech isn't, there's nothing to study. No, there are things that we need to look at, but kind of putting it again in that perspective, I think. How do we make students aware that potential schools employers will be checking their social media accounts? Oh, you don't need to. They are well aware of that. Maybe young kids aren't quite aware. I often say that millennials gotten themselves into more problem with that than Generation Z because like we went in blind, right? Social media did not exist when I was in college. Actually, it started, I think, right my last year. But we were just like, oh, this is a thing for college students. No one's looking at it and we're posting stuff left and right. And then all of a sudden it blew up into the big thing it is now. And it was like, whoosh. Actually, I remember the moment where Facebook released Timeline. I don't know if any of you remember Timeline, but it went from being your old stuff was buried under an endless stream that no one would ever see to being indexable by year. And so like people who are now professionals have their photos from freshman year right there. And they did not have that awareness. Most kids now are told that from a very, very, very young age. That's why they like Snapchat.
True.
That is why they like Snapchat.
Yeah, it loops off.
Yes, they've been told your Facebook feed is a permanent artifact that will haunt you for the rest of your lives. Okay, Snapchat, because it disappears, right? Now, again, I always tell them not really. It's still searchable, it's still accessible, but that is why they like Snapchat is because they're very aware of that. And I think that's where we're seeing Gen Z is actually more savvy with that than we realize. They're aware of these concerns and they're very concerned about them.
Well, especially if they're using things as a stepping stone to be kind of that perfect student or that perfect person like you were describing.
And it's kind of, again, that pressure of growing up in a recession and things like that. You do get that sense coming from them. Again, then does that mean that all of them are that way? No, some of them don't understand this and they need to be told that. And there's countless examples to help people see, again, what happens online rarely stays online. But most of them are quite aware of that. It's working. Whatever we're telling them seems to be mostly working. They're very conscious about that.
Should children be aware of appropriate times to use social media devices in public and when not to do so? How do we define those? That is actually a situation that is a great example of how social norms shift with technology. A lot of people are worried about like, everyone's just out on their devices, right? And the students, when I asked them to do an assignment where they go a day with
logging all of their technology use in a day without technology. The main observation of the day without technology is usually, oh my gosh, everyone's on their devices all the time. That's really obnoxious when you don't have one. But when you do have one, it's not a problem, right? Because I'm bored and I get on my device. And they actually tell you, like, there's social cues that they take from each other. So like there's times where we're supposed to be talking to each other, but then there's times where we all check our
You're walking together, but you're all on your phone or something.
We almost, they know what those times are. Are we okay with that? I mean, that's kind of a big, broad scale question. I would say that we do need to be a little bit more aware of being present with the people we're with. Again, does that mean all the time? No. So I'll often talk about like roommates. You don't need to be present with your roommate all the time, talking to, that's not realistic. But it's also not good if we are always in our own rooms, on our own devices, doing our own personalized thing. Personalization is another related thing I haven't talked about yet. That's kind of an interesting thing with technology, is the way to which it's now so personalized. So, I mean, I can't make the New York Times give me an Aaron edition that caters to all things Aaron and my interests. Yeah. I haven't, I mean, Google, if I type something in, it knows what I've looked in the past, and it gives me that. Social media, the reason we like it so much is that they have algorithms to give me exactly what I like and exactly what I want. And if I don't like things, it's not going to give it to me because it wants to suck me in, right? Best way to do that is give me what I like. Now, again, the concern there is I'm only seeing what I like. Right. I'm only interacting with content that I agree with. So a lot of people realize this for the first time in the last election. We hear like echo chambers and things like that. Again, that's an interesting thing of social media, the extent to which things are so catered to you that you lose sight of some of the bigger things outside of you. The other piece that comes with it, that's probably the biggest concern I actually have with all of this, that amusingly I haven't mentioned because it's not necessarily interpersonal, is that a lot of our interpersonal communication via social media is now data. Right? So this trade-off between personalization and privacy. So I like that everything's personalized to me, but
what is the repercussion of that?
Yeah, the fact that kids, I mean, not just that it's going to be used for jobs and stuff like that, but that it is data that is being used in a variety of ways. And the Cambridge Analytica thing, if anyone followed that, was a great example. This is being used for political advertising to me. So my behavior on Facebook is being used to sell to advertisers who will then, target me for things that are extremely likely to be powerful because it's made for me, right? So the ability to target folks like that. The Face app. Did you see the Face app?
Yeah, I saw the Face app.
The Face app is a timely example of this. I don't know how many of you did the Face app challenge. And what I loved about this is that we are learning. We learned from Cambridge Analytica, right? And so with this, everyone got really worried because Russians have your pictures now. Right. I was less concerned about the Russian thing, but I love that we were concerned about it because we should be concerned about every single app you download. I was at a movie theater the other day, and if you download our app, we'll give you a $2 discount. I was like, if I download your app, and I started like reading the terms of agreement, and it's basically saying that it has a tracking beacon on my phone. It's going to follow me wherever I go. And I'm like, that's not worth $2. Yeah. Right. And anything that's free comes with a cost, and it's usually your privacy. And we have no idea. I can't tell you how this is going to play out because this is happening now. People are worried about it for very good reasons because this data is held by private companies. And some, the government is trying to say that we should hone these private companies in the same way that we do other, like utilities and things like that. But there's questions, big questions there that are rightfully concerning.
Yeah. Are there any other final questions that you wanted to tackle? We've got a few more minutes left.
Let's see here. Oh, here's a good one. What is your opinion about platforms where not everything is highlighted or perfect? So basically those things where we can connect outside of like our own identity. There are a lot of websites out there that are anonymous. We use a username. And I used the term fixed network earlier, the idea that I am me interacting with my network. There's also what we call flexible networks, which is that I can tap in and out of these networks. The kind of cool thing about those networks is that I'm free to experiment with my identity. So I don't have to be me if I don't want to be me. And again, is that deceptive? Maybe, but maybe I'm playing up on something that you don't know about. So there's pieces of me that my network doesn't know about, right? Maybe I have some crazy, embarrassing hobby that I would never tell you about. Now you're all wondering what it is, right? But I can go explore that online. Or maybe I just want to see what it's like to live life in somebody else's shoes. I can do that. A great example of this is people wanting to self-disclose things that they aren't ready to self-disclose to their network. Because once you do that, you can't go back. But if you have a username and you go on to a platform like that, you can, disclose. I think I have an illness. I think I have a whatever the case is. I might be gay is a great one that teens really benefit from those sorts of sites. And so I think those networks provide their own unique opportunities. The problem there is that anytime we have a lack of anytime we have anonymity, we also increase disinhibition, the sense of I'm not me.
Right, this kind of avatar world.
So what's great is that I'm not me, which means I can go on there and I can, disclose things I'm not ready to disclose, and I can explore things that I normally couldn't explore. I'm not stuck in my physical body, but I'm also not held responsible for what I say or do. This is where we see trolling, flaming, online bullying, and things that you would never see. Like go on Reddit versus Facebook.
Yeah,
they're both social media sites, right? So this is different. One is anonymous. Go on those kinds of sites, and you see people just eviscerating each other using expletive-filled rants that you would not put in front of your grandma on Facebook. And so this is where we see all these channels playing a role, and we are aware of the channel, right? And we see all that play out in the way people choose their channels.
Yeah. All right. Is there anything else you wanted to, tell our viewers for today? Or
I saw a whole bunch of great questions. Sorry if I couldn't get to your question. There's actually a ton of them like streaming in, and so the ones that caught my eye. I don't know. I think there's lots and lots and lots that could be looked at here. Again, I approach this from the angle of relationships. People are approaching it from other angles. To me, the biggest thing that I try to keep in mind is, again, that perspective. If we get caught up in the idea of like social media, well, first of all, social media isn't a thing. It's many things. It's Reddit, it's Facebook, it's Twitter, it's Snapchat. All of those are different. We use them differently. We can't treat them as though Reddit is the same as Facebook, because if we do, then we risk saying that people just lie on Facebook. Well, no, you can't lie on Facebook very well. You can present yourself positively, but you can't outright lie or you won't have any friends. You can on Reddit, right? Yeah. All kind of noting that, kind of breaking that apart, this monolithic nature of it. And then also, again, just kind of putting this in perspective helps us to isolate what's actually going on without getting caught up in this like hysterical sense of fear of like, we're not going to get rid of all this technology. It's here to stay, and it's going to keep advancing. So rather than getting caught up in the fear of it, let's look at what is going on, which pieces should be feared, and which pieces are maybe just different, right? Like, that's different, so I don't trust it, but maybe it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Or maybe we'll adapt to it. Or we should not adapt to that. We need to, as a society, have something to prevent that, right? Again, we can do that. If I don't like notifications, I hated, like I said, I hated it. I felt like people were just like buzzing me left and right, and it was really anxiety provoking for me. So I turned them off, and we can do that. Kind of, again, taking power over our tools. We create the tools, we have power over them. And that's an important thing to remember, I think.
That's a good point. Thank you so much for your time, and thanks to everyone who joined us today. The next webinar is scheduled for August 29th, and it's on a very, very different topic. It's on estate planning for adults of all ages, and it will be a live conversation with Gina Gadke, who's the class of '89, and she is board certified in estate planning and probate, the Texas Board of Legal Specialization. So really appreciate your time, and thank you so much.